The night, a little girl in a torn white dress wrapped herself around my legs. In front of 300 donors, half the room decided I was some kind of hero, and the other half decided I was out of my mind. What none of them knew was that the man chasing her was tied to an old revenge plan, or that this 6-year-old shaking and barefoot was about to blow up everything I thought I knew about power, safety, and family. Out of everyone in that ballroom full of important people, she ran to me, the billionaire everybody assumed was untouchable, and turned my carefully controlled life inside out. My name is Marcus Davenport. On paper, I'm the polished founder of a tech company people like to call an empire, the guy in interviews talking about innovation while wearing an expensive watch. What the articles don't show is the silence waiting in my penthouse at night. The way I had slowly convinced myself that work and money were safer than letting anybody really need me. After my divorce, I decided feelings were liabilities. I would just sign checks, run my foundation, keep my heart out of it. Right up until the spring fundraiser at the Riverside Hotel. The ballroom looked like every cliché Chandelier's live orchestra champagne fountain. The mayor at my elbow talking about tax incentives, while I nodded and thought about getting home. The music was mid-phrase when the big doors slammed open. A little girl stood there, dress ripped, hair wild, one shoe gone, cheeks streaked with tears, chest heaving, as she searched a sea of strangers like she was drowning. You know that feeling when your stomach drops before your brain knows why? That hit me. Her eyes locked on mine, she sprinted straight at me, weaving through gowns and tuxes until she crashed into my legs and latched on like she meant to weld herself there. "Please," she sobbed, voice breaking, "please, he's coming. You have to help me, he's coming, and he'll find me." The orchestra stopped. Conversations died. Phones came up like we were on a movie set. I set my glass down, dropped to my knees, and put my hands very gently on her shoulders because she was shaking so hard I thought she might fall over. "Hey, you're okay right now. You're safe," I told her. "What's your name, Charlotte?" she hiccuped. "Charlotte." "Monroe, please don't let him take me," he said. "Nobody would believe me that I just make up stories. I've sat across from liars and manipulators for years. I know what fake fear looks like. This wasn't fake." The event coordinator Power walked up with a tight smile, already apologizing for the disruption and reaching for Charlotte like she was a spilled drink to be cleaned up. "Don't touch her," I said, calm but sharp enough that she froze. "Who's coming?" I asked. "The girl who are you afraid of?" Before she could answer, a man's voice boomed from the doorway. "There you are, you little brat. I've been looking everywhere for you." A tall guy in a wrinkled security uniform strode in like he owned the place. His badge said, "Frank Morrison, Event Security." But the uniform fit wrong. His shirt was missing a button. His hands had fresh scratches, and his eyes kept bouncing between the exits and me. "Sir." "I apologize for the disturbance," he said, flipping into this polite tone as soon as he saw my tux. "This is my daughter. She's been having behavioral issues, making up stories, running away. Her mother and I are at our wits' end." Behind me, Charlotte's voice cracked. "I'm not making it up. He's lying. Please don't let him take me." The hotel's real guards looked confused, like they'd never seen this guy. The radio on his belt wasn't standard. He never once looked at the child he claimed was his. I stood up slowly, keeping Charlotte behind me, my hand on her back. "Where's her mother?" I asked. His jaw twitched before he forced a smile. "Working the late shift at County General. I'm supposed to be watching her. She snuck away kids, you know how they are." "I didn't sneak," she said, eyes blazing through the tears. "I ran. Because you—" "Enough," he snapped, mask slipping for a second, to show pure anger before he plastered on a new smile. "Look, Mr. Davenport, I recognize you from the news. A busy man like you doesn't need family drama. Just let me take my daughter home, he said, stepping closer, reaching past me. My assistant Gregory was already at my elbow, phone in his hand. I didn't move. We're not doing that, I told him. Gregory, call the police. His face went from red to purple. You can't be serious. That's my kid. You're the one keeping her from me. That's kidnapping. Step aside before this gets ugly. It's already ugly, I said. What security firm do you work for? What's your badge number? Because this hotel contracts with a company I hired, and I've never seen you before in my life. The air shifted. People backed away, others leaned in, phones aimed. Charlotte tugged my jacket, voice suddenly loud enough to carry. He's not my father, she said. My dad died 2 years ago. Frank was dating my mom, but she broke up with him last week. He came to our apartment when she was at work. He said if I told anyone what he did, he'd hurt her. He said nobody would believe me because I'm just a kid who makes up stories. There are moments where the decision makes itself. That was one. His eyes went flat. His hand drifted toward his belt, and I saw what he had there wasn't a standard radio. Sirens were faint outside. Everything in me narrowed. Charlotte, I said quietly, stay right behind me and don't move. Then to him, here's what's going to happen. You're going to wait here until the police arrive. You're going to show them ID. And if everything you're saying is true, you'll walk out, but you are not taking one more step toward her. He sneered. You rich guys think you can do whatever you want. Think your money makes you better than everyone else. I swear, if you don't hand her over right now, you'll what? I took one step forward, threatened me in front of hundreds of witnesses and 30 cameras. For a few seconds, nobody breathed. Then he spun around, shoved through the crowd, and ran for a side exit. Real security and a couple guests went after him. Charlotte's knees gave out. She collapsed against me, sobbing, and I picked her up without thinking. She wrapped her arms around my neck like a vice and buried her face in my shoulder. You're safe, I told her quietly. But like a vow, I've got you. You're safe. That is how I went from giving a toast about education to sitting in a plastic chair at the police station, in a wrinkled tux tie, hanging loose with a 6-year-old, leaning against my arm, and a styrofoam cup of terrible coffee in my hand. Detective Amy Rodriguez took Charlotte's statement with the kind of patience the world doesn't give kids often enough, letting her pause when the memories hit too hard, treating her like a person, not a problem. At one point, she looked at me and said, most people in that ballroom would have pretended they didn't see anything. I thought of all the people staring at their phones. Most people did, I said. I have a niece her age, and once she grabbed me like that, there was no version where I unsaw her. About an hour later, the doors flew open, and a woman in purple scrubs rushed in like the floor was on fire. Charlie, she cried, and Charlotte ran so fast, she almost slid on the tile before colliding with her. They hit their knees in the middle of the lobby, clinging to each other, sobbing and apologizing in the tangled way only a terrified mom and a scared kid can. That was my first real look at Jennifer Monroe. Hair half out of a ponytail, stethoscope still around her neck. Hospital shoes on her feet. Eyes rimmed red. When the detective gently explained who I was and what had happened at the gala, she turned to me. Her gaze dropped to my wrinkled tux and the tear stains on my lapel, then back up. You're Marcus Davenport, she said quietly. They told me you stood between him and my daughter, that you refused to let him touch her. I don't know how to thank you. There aren't words big enough. I told her I just did what anyone should do. She shook her head. No, she said, most people would have let him drag her out to keep the party going. You didn't. In that cramped interview room, I got the short version of her story. widowed when her firefighter husband died, working brutal shifts as a nurse to keep them in a decent school district meeting. Frank at her lowest point, missing the red flags until it was almost too late. I walked out that night with the official label of Good Samaritan. But the truth was, I was the one feeling like my life had just been knocked off autopilot. I kept checking in. At first through the detective, then directly. I wanted to make sure Frank stayed locked up, that Jennifer knew her rights, that Charlotte had counseling, and at least a few peaceful nights. I sent groceries and a ridiculous fruit basket flowers for the nurses on her floor. Jennifer always said, "You really didn't have to," and never once asked for more. A couple of weeks later, my phone rang and a small voice said, "Mr. Marcus, it's Charlotte. My birthday's next week. We can't have a big party because of lawyer stuff, but there'll be cake and I really, really want you to come." So I went. I climbed 3 flights of stairs in a building with peeling paint, carrying a gift bag that somehow felt heavier than any contract. The apartment was tiny, but spotless, kids' drawings on the walls, old couch, cheap table, the whole place smelling like vanilla cake. Charlotte threw herself at me, laughing this time instead of crying. I gave her a real art set, good pencils, real watercolors, and watched her face light up like I'd handed her the keys to a new world. In that small kitchen, helping Jennifer cut cake while kids yelled over musical chairs, I felt more grounded than I had in a ballroom full of rich people in a long time. If the story ended there, it would just be a nice billionaire actually followed through moment. But the twist came a few weeks later when my head of security walked into my office with a file and a look that made my stomach drop. "Frank Morrison made bail," he said. "That shouldn't have been possible. The judge had set it at $500,000 and Frank had nothing. Someone paid it in cash," Robert told me, "and he's got a very expensive lawyer now." We followed the money. It came from a shell company that owns Peterson Construction. Peterson was one of the firms on my big Riverside Heights project. Behind that shell company sat a name I knew too well. My former partner, Graham Whitfield, the man I had forced out for embezzling the man who promised I'd regret making an enemy of him. We dug deeper and saw the pattern. Graham had been using construction companies to move dirty money. Frank was muscle. Getting close to Jennifer, getting into my gala with fake credentials, turning a terrified child into a public spectacle with me in the middle. None of it was random. Jennifer and Charlotte were leverage. When Robert called again to say Frank had already violated his restraining order by showing up near Charlotte's school, that a teacher had spotted him trying to talk to her at recess, that was it for me. I stopped thinking like a CEO and started thinking like the man who had told a shaking 6-year-old she was safe. I called Jennifer, told her to pack a bag, showed up at her apartment 15 minutes later, and brought them both to my penthouse, putting security on every entrance. Watching Charlotte press her hands to the glass and whisper that the city lights looked like stars. Watching Jennifer stand in my marble foyer, apologizing for taking up space, I realized I had spent years treating that place like a trophy instead of a shelter. Meanwhile, Graham's lawyer was on TV painting me as an out-of-control billionaire who had kidnapped a security guard's daughter and used his influence to have an innocent man arrested. I could have fought it quietly. Instead, I called a press conference. Standing on a stage in my own building, cameras pointed at me, I told the story you're hearing now, minus the swear words my lawyers made me cut. I talked about Charlotte running to me about what Frank did, about the evidence on his phone, about the paper trail from Graham's shell companies to Frank's lawyer and to Peterson Construction. When a reporter asked if I was inappropriately involved with a vulnerable single mother, I didn't dodge it. I said yes, Jennifer and Charlotte had become incredibly important to me, yes. They were staying in my home because it was the safest place I had, and no, I wasn't ashamed of using my money and power to protect them, instead of pretending I didn't know them. It got messy after that. Hearings, headlines, strangers online calling me a monster or a saint, depending on which clip they'd seen. But under pressure, Frank took a plea deal and testified about the money laundering. Graham was arrested on fraud, racketeering, conspiracy, the whole alphabet. Peterson was dissolved. The workers moved to legitimate contractors, some finally getting the wages they were owed. Through all of that, life in my penthouse quietly changed shape. Sunday pancakes with Charlotte bossing me around at the stove became normal. Evenings where Jennifer studied for her nursing certification at my kitchen island, while I skimmed contracts, started to matter more than the numbers on those pages. Movie nights where Charlotte fell asleep between us, and I carried her to the guest room, while Jennifer watched with tired, soft eyes, made the space feel less like a glass box and more like something else. A life. About a year after that first gala, we went back to the Riverside Hotel, not for a fundraiser, but for a tiny ceremony in a side room. No orchestra, no donors, just a few friends, a judge and a determined 7-year-old in a yellow dress carrying flowers and her sketchbook. When she reached us, she opened it to show a drawing of the three of us holding hands in front of a tall building with big windows. Above us, in crooked rainbow letters, she'd written one word, home. Out of every magazine cover and headline my name has ever sat on, that uneven word in colored pencil is the one that actually means something to me. People still argue about me online. Some say I threw my weight around to crush a working-class guy. Some say I'm proof rich people can be decent. Some say I should have minded my own business and let the system work. The truth is messier. I'm not a saint, and I'm not a villain. I'm just a man who happened to be standing there when a terrified child decided to grab my legs and ask for help, a man who had enough power that doing nothing would have been its own kind of choice. So I'm curious what you think. If you'd walked into that ballroom with no context and seen the footage, who would you have believed first? The crying kid, the man in the uniform, or the guy in the tux? Do you think people with money can ever use that power in a way that feels fair? Or does it always look wrong from the outside, no matter what they do? Tell me in the comments how this hits you, where you think I handled it right, where you think I messed up. Whether you think stepping in was overstepping, or exactly what needed to happen. Share your own stories if you've seen the system fail kids, or seen somebody with power actually use it to protect instead of exploit. And if this story stirred anything in you, hit subscribe if you want more. Long, messy, true-style stories like this, send it to someone who needs the reminder that being underestimated or misjudged is not the end of your story. Sometimes it's exactly where the real story starts.